Hey guys, tonight we're wandering through the candlelit corridors of ancient Rome, brushing past polished marble columns and soft sandal steps to uncover a strangely quiet drama. The emperor forgot someone's birthday. Not a general, not a senator, just a servant. And he felt bad about it, bad enough to write a letter. Now picture this. You're in a stone hallway holding a wax tablet in one hand, and your stomach is still grumbling from missing breakfast because someone stole your ration of dates. You've got scrolls to carry and sandals to scrub. And the emperor, the actual Marcus Aurelius, just walked by looking preoccupied. He didn't even notice you. Again, you sigh. And then days later, you get a note from him, apologizing because he missed your birthday. It sounds absurd, doesn't it? But that's exactly what makes it perfect for tonight's slow dive into a corner of history so specific and oddly tender, you might just drift off mid-thought. Which, by the way, is kind of the goal. You probably won't survive this story, but only because it's been medically engineered to make your eyelids heavier with every emperor's sigh and philosophical tangent. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel before bed. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle slowly through the pale atrium of the imperial palace, your feet brushing over the cool mosaic tiles. There's a chill in the early morning air, and torchlight flickers just enough to reveal the pattern beneath your toes. Intertwining vines, a lone eagle, and somewhere just out of reach, the distant murmur of servants beginning their day. Someone sneezes down the hallway. Someone else drops a ceramic cup. It's not your birthday, thankfully, so no expectations today. But on this particular morning, in this particular year, sometime in the final decades of the 2nd century CE, it was someone's birthday, and it was forgotten. Now, Roman birthdays aren't exactly what you think. They weren't grand affairs for most people, not unless you were rich, powerful, or very bored. But still, for a servant, a small nod, perhaps a sweet bun, maybe a second serving of lentils, or just a simple Felicem Diem Natalem, meant the world. Except today, nothing. And the man who forgot. Not just a master or a supervisor. No, he was the emperor, the philosopher king himself. Marcus Aurelius, the guy with his own book of meditations, the same guy who faced plagues, wars, and the trauma of raising a teenage son in Roman politics. That guy. And even he, maybe especially, he made human mistakes. You're not sure what strikes you more, that he forgot or that it bugged him. But let's step away from the cold marble and into the smaller rooms, the quieter ones. Because while statues of Marcus might show him as a commanding figure on horseback or seated in stoic contemplation, the real Marcus, at least in this moment, was pacing around a cramped study room muttering to himself about how dumb he felt. He had meant to say something, he really had. The servant in question wasn't just a name on a roster. Let's call him Tiro, for the sake of your sleepy mind. It's a plausible Roman name. Tiro had been with Marcus for years. He fetched scrolls. He boiled herbs when the emperor's chest ached. He even once patched up the philosopher's sandal with a little sliver of boiled leather, no thanks given, just a nod. Over time, Tiro became something more than a servant. Maybe not quite a friend. Rome was funny about crossing social lines, but someone close enough that forgetting his birthday felt off. A misalignment in the balance of things. So Marcus did the unthinkable. He penned an apology, a letter. Now don't get too excited. You're not going to hear a dramatic recitation with tears and emotional hand-wringing. This was Marcus Aurelius, not a soap opera character. His style, measured, dry, philosophical. Something like, I have allowed the day to pass unmarked, though it deserved remembrance. The fault is mine. I hope this note, though late, finds you in good health. Perhaps the stars will be kinder to me in memory next year. Classic Marcus. Even his guilt comes out like a logic puzzle. What's oddly moving, though, is that he didn't have to do this. He was emperor. He had bigger things to worry about. The Antonine Plague was still lingering like an unwelcome guest. Barbarians pressed against the empire's borders. His own son Commodus. Yes, that Commodus was probably off sparring with gladiators or hatching some idiotic plan involving a lion. But Marcus paused, he noticed, and he wrote, "You sit with that image for a moment, the most powerful man in Rome scratching a note on wax because his conscience pricked him. And now you're leaning against a column watching a breeze stir the heavy drapes. Somewhere outside you can hear the faint sounds of the city waking up vendors, arranging olives, donkeys, protesting the load of laundry carts. Time moves slowly here. That's the point. You look over again at Marcus's note. It's not grand. No promises, no coins slipped inside, no orders to throw a belated feast. Just a few words, carefully carved. And maybe, just maybe, that made it more memorable. Because here's a secret, letters like this didn't usually survive. Most Roman correspondence gone. Burned, reused, lost in damp caves and crumbling villas. But somehow this one lingered. Maybe Tiro kept it, folded it into a tunic pocket. Maybe he reread it on harder days. Maybe he even told his children, if he ever got the freedom to have any, that the emperor once apologized to him. It's a sleepy kind of story. No battles, no betrayals, just one small ripple of grace. And as you step back into the dim corridor, a candle winks out behind you. The palace exhales. You can almost smell the fading wax, the citrusy tang of polished marble, the earthy scent of freshly unrolled scrolls. Someone hums a lullaby in the distance. It might be a nursemaid, or maybe just your imagination. And somewhere out of sight now, Tiro reads the letter again and smiles. You linger now at the edge of that thought, the wax letter still soft in your mind, and you start to feel the weight of the man who wrote it, pressing in around the walls. Marcus Aurelius. He's not the kind of emperor you expect to forget a birthday in the first place, which somehow makes it worse that he did. So let's shadow him more closely. Follow his steps across the stone floors and between the folds of history to get a better sense of who he is. Not the golden statue version, but the sleep-deprived philosopher, with a spine that cracks when he stretches too quickly and a head full of more worries than you care to count. You watch him now in his private study. No throne, no parade, just a low-burning lamp, a worn wooden table, and a stack of half-scribbled wax tablets that all smell faintly of sheep. He's muttering something under his breath again. Probably Latin. Probably a line from Epictetus, or one of those soothing but vague maxims that sound deep, until you realize it's just fancy wording for don't stress. Marcus is always quoting philosophers, especially the Stoics. He loves the idea of inner calm, equanimitas. You hear that word a lot. Tranquility, balance. Except you're watching him now, and he is absolutely not calm. His face is creased. He's irritated with himself for forgetting Tiro's birthday. But he's also irritated that he's irritated, which for a Stoic is practically a crisis. Here's the thing about Marcus, he didn't start off as a ruler. Not really. He was groomed into it like a kid who's told he's good at math, so he has to become an accountant. Except in his case, the career path led to running the most powerful empire in the world. He would have preferred to spend his days in a library, wrapped in a toga that smelled faintly of olive oil, debating virtue with a sleepy group of old men. Instead, he was adopted by the Emperor Antoninus Pius and pulled into a destiny filled with Senate debates, military logistics, and awkward dinner conversations with political allies who smelled like overripe figs. And yet, he did it. He became emperor, a real one. One who led armies, made laws, handled plagues. But he never stopped thinking like a philosopher. That's why you feel something tender in the way he writes to Tiro. He doesn't see himself as a god-king. More like the world's most exhausted guidance counselor. Historians still argue whether Marcus Aurelius truly wrote all his famous meditations, or whether some were polished by later admirers. But the tone, the relentless self-reflection, that's undeniably Marcus. He once wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Which sounds impressive until you remember, This is a man who probably had to deal with a daily deluge of people lying about whose goat chewed whose grain sack. His daily life wasn't just philosophical pontificating, it was mundane drudgery too. He'd sit through Senate meetings where half the room was trying to look busy while secretly napping. He had to approve budgets, deal with border patrols, and once, according to a fringe account, respond to a formal complaint about a particularly noisy bakery in Trastevere. Not exactly Plato's Academy, and yet in all that he found time to write little notes, to reflect, to apologize. You start to realize something as you pace the candlelit halls alongside him. Marcus wasn't a perfect emperor. He made his share of bad calls. There was that time he gave more and more power to the Senate and the equestrian class, hoping for balance, but instead it just created more infighting. And of course his decision to groom Commodus as heir, well, let's just say historians raise an eyebrow so high it could qualify for its own monument. But despite all that, there's something oddly touching about him. He cared. He tried to do the right thing. He agonized over his failures in real time in wax with ink-stained fingers and a slight squint because he definitely needed glasses that hadn't been invented yet. You follow him as he walks through the palace gardens, now whispering lines of Greek to himself. He walks in circles. Philosophers love circles. Around him, the world is noisy barking dogs, clanking armor, someone shouting about cabbage prices, but Marcus tries to hold stillness inside. Some days it works. Other days, like today, he forgets things. Important things, like Tiro's birthday. And that bothers him more than the cabbage. You pause beside a lemon tree as he sits beneath a pergola alone with his thoughts. You can hear them swirling soft and relentless. You should have remembered. You didn't. Why? Because you were reading. Because you were distracted by the plague again. Is that good enough? You imagine the weight of his own expectations pressing down on his shoulders like a lead-lined toga. At this point, even the marble busts around the garden look sympathetic. There's a debate among scholars about whether Marcus was too philosophical for his job. Some say his constant rumination made him slow to act. Others argue that his thoughtful approach is what kept Rome relatively stable during his reign, especially considering the chaos that followed under Commodus. Still others think the whole idea of the philosopher king was just branding that he wanted to be remembered, not as a conqueror, but as a thinker. Like Plato's dream come to life, but with more paperwork. Yet here's the fringe tidbit that brings it all home. There's an unverified story buried in the writings of later scribes that Marcus once asked a young servant whether he looked tired. The boy replied, yes, but mostly in the eyes. And Marcus supposedly laughed and said, that's where I live. Maybe it never happened. Maybe it did. But you can see it, can't you? This exhausted man who ruled an empire forgot a birthday and couldn't forgive himself for it. He's more than just a bust on a museum shelf. He's real. He's pacing the garden at night, crafting a humble apology in his head, wondering whether Tiro even noticed. Spoiler, Tiro definitely noticed. You watch Marcus finally return to his room, sit at his desk and pick up a stylus. He hesitates just for a second, then begins to write. You leave him there, head bent, fingers moving, and drift slowly back into the cool stone corridors, past the painted frescoes of gods and myths, past the quiet echo of sandals on marble. The letter is almost done. You leave Marcus hunched over his desk, scratching out those deliberate words of apology, and you start to wonder, what was it about birthdays in ancient Rome anyway? What did it mean to miss one? What sort of social code was being broken when a servant's birthday passed unnoticed? Because this wasn't just about cake. In fact, there was no cake. The Romans had no layered sponge marvels with frosting and sprinkles. The closest you'd get was maybe a honey-drenched pastry or some overly chewy dates stuffed with pine nuts. If you were lucky. If you weren't well, you got whatever was left from last night's bean stew. Still, a birthday was a marker. A pulse of recognition in a life that was otherwise, let's be honest, pretty repetitive. especially for servants. You imagine Tiro again, now stoic, reliable, maybe 28 years old, maybe 43. You're not great with estimating Roman ages, especially after all that sun exposure. He probably didn't expect much. A nod, maybe a shared plum. But it mattered. See, the Romans actually did birthdays in a big way if you had the right status. For the elites, a dies natalis, literally day of birth, was a semi-religious affair. They'd offer prayers to their genius, their personal protective spirit. Think of it like a cosmic life coach crossed with a grumpy guardian angel. You'd offer wine, maybe a little incense, sometimes even a chicken, if you were feeling extra blessed. And for emperors, oh, forget it. The emperor's birthday could turn into a full-blown public festival. People poured into the forum. Statues got garlanded. Bread got handed out like Oprah giving away cars. You get a loaf? You get a loaf. Everybody gets a loaf. It became political. If you didn't show up to toast the emperor's birthday, you might as well have insulted his mother, his ancestors, and the entire concept of imperial authority. Basically, bad move. But for the common folk servants, freedmen, labourers, a birthday was quieter. It lived in small gestures. A moment carved out of toil, maybe a shared joke, a small cup of wine, or for the truly lucky, a break from chores. So when Marcus forgot Tiro's birthday, it wasn't just a mental slip. It was a tiny fracture in the very Roman matrix of patronage and loyalty. Because Rome ran on hierarchy, yes, but also on a constant balancing act of favours, respect, and unspoken debts. Historians still argue whether lower-class birthdays were widely celebrated at all, or if only a certain slice of the population marked them regularly. Some believe that by the 2nd century, CE, even slaves could observe their birthdays in small ways, especially in more cosmopolitan cities like Rome or Alexandria. That would make sense. Tiro, being close to the emperor, probably had more leeway than the average field labourer chained to an olive press. You picture him waking up that morning hoping for something. A subtle gesture. A smile from a fellow servant. Maybe Marcus saying something offhanded like, "You're not getting older, you're getting more reliable." Classic Marcus humour dry as a papyrus scroll, but instead the day passed in silence, and now with the letter Marcus is trying to patch that silence. Meanwhile, the rest of the palace doesn't even know or care. Out in the kitchens, someone's yelling about spoiled garum. In the stables, a groom is trying to coax a horse into standing still long enough for its hooves to be scraped. The palace hums with oblivious routine, but not Tiro. He gets the letter late in the afternoon, folded neatly and sealed with a bit of pressed wax bearing the emperor's household emblem, a lion paw wrapped around a laurel. You watch him open it slowly, his calloused fingers brushing the wax aside like it's too precious to smudge. He reads it once, then again. There's no poetry, no grand gesture, just a man's quiet admission that he failed to notice someone who mattered. And to Tiro, it might feel like more than enough. You think about that strange space between power and humility, between the man who commands armies and the one who writes, "I'm sorry," on a tablet of wax. Marcus was trying to live according to his Stoic ideals, but it wasn't just theory, it showed up in these small moments. Even though Roman society valued hierarchy, it also valued honour. And while it's tempting to imagine emperors as cold marble statues, the truth was, many of them had to navigate a minefield of daily interpersonal nuance. Especially someone like Marcus, who truly believed virtue wasn't just for philosophers, it was for everyone. And yet, not every emperor would have written that letter. Let's not pretend Rome was filled with sensitive tyrants sending hand-penned notes of regret. Take Caligula, for example. If he forgot your birthday, he might throw you into the Tiber just to distract from the oversight. Nero. He'd probably write a song about it and then set your house on fire to create a better acoustic environment. Marcus was different. He was thoughtful, yes, but also emotionally attuned. Maybe it's because he spent most of his reign dealing with disasters. The Antonine Plague alone wiped out millions. Every day was a lesson in grief. Maybe that taught him to notice the quiet things. Fringe accounts say he once cancelled a Senate meeting because one of his pet dogs was sick. That might be false. Or it might be Marcus, just needing one thing to go right that day. You imagine Tiro folding the letter and slipping it into his satchel like a little relic. Maybe he won't talk about it. Maybe he'll just carry it for a while, then hide it in a crack in the wall, where only dust and time will find it. And so the palace continues its slow breathing. Torches flicker low. A cat slips through a colonnade. The city outside dims into pink twilight, and somewhere inside that enormous echoing world, one forgotten birthday is quietly, sincerely remembered. Tiro's hands are still warm from the letter. You stay near him, almost shoulder to shoulder, though he can't see. You can't hear you. He's just standing there now in one of the quieter wings of the imperial complex, where the sound of sandals fades into linen curtains and stone. He tucks the folded tablet into his tunic and exhales one of those long, private sighs you only make when the day's tension has finally cracked. But we're not going to follow Tiro just yet. Not fully. Because now, your curiosity tugs you back to the heart of the system that created both the emperor and the servant. You want to understand how a man like Marcus Aurelius was shaped, trained, and placed at the helm of something so massive it barely fits inside your imagination. You want to know what being emperor really looked like beneath the purple robes and marble busts. You start to feel it as you move through the imperial archive, a cool, dusty room filled with scrolls and broken reed pens, with the scent of wax and vellum tickling your nose. This isn't the glamorous side of ruling. This is the admin, the bureaucracy, the headaches. You might think an emperor's job was mostly waving at crowds or dictating how wide aqueducts should be. In truth, it was more like being the world's busiest middle manager with existential dread and a standing war on two fronts. Marcus Aurelius inherited a relatively peaceful empire from Antoninus Pius, his adoptive father. That peace didn't last. Before long, he was knee-deep in military logistics, particularly the Marcomannic Wars, a long series of brutal frontier battles that spanned across Germania like a very aggressive and muddy board game. Historians still argue whether Marcus was more of a philosopher or a soldier. Some say he was overly cautious in his campaigns, favouring defensive strategies that prolong conflict. Others argue that his ability to manage the empire while leading armies shows a kind of genius no marble bust could ever capture. What's clear is this: he didn't want to be on those frontiers. He wanted to be home reading Plato and maybe apologising to Tiro in person instead of through wax. But emperors don't get to choose their calendar. In one of the meditations, his private journal of thoughts written during these campaigns, Marcus says, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." You hear that now, echoing through the muddy encampments, the snow-choked roads, the coughs of sick soldiers coughing in their tents. Marcus wrote those words while being cold sick and probably covered in the Roman equivalent of bug bites. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't clean. He was deep in the muck of war, and still he wrote. Still he thought about character. Still he kept asking what kind of man he wanted to be. And while all that was happening back in Rome, Tiro and the others held the palace together. Not just physically, but emotionally. The emperor might have had statues, but it was the staff who made sure he didn't become one. You walk now through the servant corridors. The air is different here, cooler, less perfumed. The floors are rougher. This isn't the Rome you see on postcards or in prestige TV. This is the hum of the machine, the silent, essential presence of people like Tiro, who carried the emotional weight of those in charge, while rarely being mentioned by name. There's a fringe tidbit tucked away in the notebooks of a lesser-known Roman historian. Supposedly, when Marcus returned from one of his long military campaigns, he didn't go to the Senate first. He went to the kitchen to see who was still alive, who was still working, who had waited for him. It may not be true, it probably isn't, but it feels true. You can imagine it. His tired face thinner from war, his eyes sweeping the familiar hallways. And maybe, just maybe, he saw Tiro and gave him a nod. Not grand, just real. There's something so heartbreakingly Roman about that. The empire was obsessed with rituals and honors and spectacles. But underneath it all were these quiet gestures, unwritten loyalties, soft apologies, folded letters. The Roman administrative system was huge. It had to be. The empire stretched from the rainy cliffs of Britannia to the burning sands of Arabia. That kind of sprawl needs 1,000 hands, 1,000 eyes. And Marcus, he tried to see them. Not all, maybe, but some. He didn't just run Rome, he felt it. The sickness, the pain, the absurdities. In fact, he once wrote a scathing comment about the Senate wasting time arguing over whether to use gold or bronze for an honorary statue while people were dying in the streets from plague. That's not in the tourist brochures. You duck now into the imperial treasury, not for the gold, but for the records. Every coin minted under Marcus had to be approved. Every shipment of grain logged. You run your fingers across a stack of wax tablets filled with numbers so precise it makes your eyes blur. His attention to detail was borderline obsessive. He wanted to keep the machine running, even when he was falling apart. And that's what makes the birthday letter so human. Because even emperors can forget the little things, especially emperors, especially Marcus, who had to remember everything else. The battles, the edicts, the weather patterns, the treaties, the dreams of dead philosophers whispering in his ear at night. You wander back now to his personal quarters, quiet and dim. The letter to Tiro has already been sent. He's lying on his side, eyes half closed, dictating a thought to a nearby scribe, probably not you, probably someone with better Latin. He mutters something like, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." And then he winces. Maybe he's thinking about the missed birthday again. Maybe he's just tired. You sit with him in that silence, listening to the soft scraping of the stylus, the distant murmur of Rome outside, and the gentle flapping of curtains in the warm air. This is the weight of ruling, the part you don't see in the statues. And as Marcus finally closes his eyes, you whisper a thought that even he might have understood being human means failing sometimes. But it also means trying to make it right, even if it's just with a folded note and a little wax. You return to Tiro. He's walking now quietly down a colonnaded corridor near the outer peristyle gardens. His steps are soft, deliberate, echoing gently off polished marble. He carries no torch, just the subtle glow of oil lamps flickering from their bronze sconces. The letter from Marcus presses lightly against his ribs inside his tunic, a warmth that's not quite physical. He doesn't smile, but something about the shape of his shoulders is different now, just a bit looser, like the weight of invisibility has shifted. You follow him as he steps into the garden, where the air is tinged with the scent of crushed rosemary and wet stone. Cicadas buzz sleepily in the corners, and a fountain murmurs over itself like it's trying to remember the right melody. This is where the imperial household breathes, not in the throne room, but in these overlooked corners. Tiro stops near a bench and sits. He doesn't pull out the letter again. He doesn't need to. Instead, he looks up at the moon, now a slivered coin in the Roman sky, and lets the evening settle around him. You sit beside him, quiet, thinking about how strange this all is. That an emperor's regret could end here in a garden carried in the chest of a man history barely remembers. But tonight Tiro is remembered. Still, the Roman world doesn't pause for birthday letters. You feel it churning around you even now, horses being harnessed in the stables, senatorial gossip slithering through atriums, a group of patrician women arguing over the colour of imported silk. Somewhere in the distance, a group of guards are trying to trap a very determined goose that has wandered into the basilica. Because yes, even in the mighty capital of the Roman Empire, a goose could cause chaos. That one historians never mention, pity. You wander through this mess with a new perspective. You're beginning to realize that the empire's machinery isn't just made of soldiers and stone, it's made of people, of rhythms, of birthdays forgotten and remembered. So let's pull back for a moment, zoom out from Marcus, from Tiro, from the palace, and drift into the wider fabric of Roman society. Because here's something strange, and true birthdays weren't always personal in Rome. Sometimes they were political. Entire cities celebrated the birthdays of emperors as public holidays. Vendors handed out bread, amphitheatres filled with games, and temples held ceremonies. In fact, Augustus, the first emperor, had his dies natalis added to the Roman calendar like a divine recurring meeting invite. And the more divine the emperor tried to seem, the more intense the birthday celebrations became. For some rulers like Domitian or Commodus, these weren't just parties, they were acts of propaganda. You weren't just eating honeyed nuts and clapping politely. You were reaffirming the cosmic importance of the emperor's existence. Historians still argue whether these imperial birthdays were sincerely beloved or just tolerated for survival. You can guess. When the guy in charge believes he's Hercules reincarnated, you don't want to be the one who skips his party. But that brings us back to Marcus. He could have turned his birthday into an empire-wide spectacle. He didn't. In fact, we barely hear about his birthdays at all. That's telling. It says something about his character that he didn't need a parade of flaming peacocks to validate his leadership. He was more likely to spend his birthday writing quietly in his journal, maybe thanking the gods with a modest offering and getting back to the business of keeping Rome stitched together. You imagine a quieter birthday for him maybe in the camp near Carnuntum. Snow flurries outside the tent, flaps tugging against their ties. Someone brings him a slightly less hard biscuit than usual, and the soldiers give him a nod, not because they have to, but because they actually like the guy. That alone is worth more than any golden statue. Now back to Tiro again. He rises from the bench, brushes a few pine needles from his tunic, and walks toward the servants' quarters. You trail him through the narrow hallways where the air is heavier, warmer, packed with the unspoken closeness of shared routines. Someone's laughing behind a curtain, probably about that goose. Another servant is muttering about missing olive oil again. The day's ending the way all Roman days end, half done, a little frayed, but still moving forward. And Tiro. He finally slips into his sleeping chamber, which is no more than a corner with a cot, a small trunk, and a niche where a tiny clay lamp flickers. He sits down on the edge of the cot, pulls out the letter again, and this time he smiles. It's not wide or dramatic, but it's real. He places the letter inside the trunk, under a folded tunic, and lies back. The straw-stuffed mattress creaks under his weight. The lamp flickers once, twice, and steadies. He stares at the ceiling and lets his breathing even out. It's strange, isn't it? One slip of parchment, or rather one wax tablet can do that, can shift something internal. And this is where you really start to feel it. The emperor, with all his power and legions and marble busts, did something simple, human and kind. And Tiro, no statue, no poem, no name, etched in triumphal arches, felt seen. It's not often history gives us these tiny collisions. More often we get battles and betrayals and long lists of who stabbed who in which bathhouse. But tonight you get this: a forgotten birthday, a note of apology, and a servant going to bed with a little more peace. You can almost feel the whole palace settling now. Not just Tiro. The air itself seems to slow, to stretch, to hum with quiet. Even Marcus is asleep now, head tilted just slightly, brows still furrowed even in his dreams. Maybe he's dreaming of philosophers, or maybe he's imagining himself not as an emperor, but as a quiet student back in a classroom before the crown and the wars and the letters. And out in the city, the moon glides higher over tiled rooftops, over the sleeping forum, over 1,000,000 lives folded into the silence of night. You listen, and for the first time in a long while it sounds like peace. You wake before Tiro does not, because you need to, but because Roman mornings don't wait for anybody, not even those with unread imperial apologies tucked beneath their linens. The palace is already stirring, in that half-whispered way mornings always do, buckets sloshing against stone, a sleepy yawn muffled in a linen sleeve, the click-clack of sandals from a too-early courier. The torches from the night shift are nearly burnt out, their orange glow flickering stubbornly like they resent being replaced by daylight. Tiro's still curled beneath his rough blanket arms, folded across his chest, his face finely relaxed. You don't rush him. After all, he's earned this sliver of peace. But eventually, habit pulls him upward. He stretches, rubs the back of his neck and reaches for the tunic he folded last night, careful not to shift the letter too much in its hiding place. He doesn't take it out. He just remembers it's there. You drift with him into the start of his day. He doesn't talk much. He rarely does in the mornings. But he listens to the hush of cloth as it wraps around him, to the tiny pop of oil igniting in a nearby lamp, to the chirp of birds that have nested somewhere absurdly high on a Corinthian column. And through him, you start to notice things about palace life that history rarely mentions. Take, for example, the breakfast arrangements. There is no glorious Roman buffet with silver trays and grapes dangling from ceiling vines. No Tiro's meal is humble a bit of flatbread, maybe dipped in leftover olive oil if he's lucky, and a handful of dried figs. He eats quickly and efficiently. There are meetings to prep for hallways to sweep missives to reroute. And yet, there's a rhythm to it all, a kind of sacred order to the chaos. You follow Tiro to the scroll room, one of the lesser-known parts of the palace, filled with rows of shelves stacked high with correspondence orders, tax receipts, and the occasional doodle from a bored bureaucrat. Yes, they doodled, usually animals wearing togas. Some things are timeless. He moves with ease here, fingers trailing over scrolls, adjusting wax tablets like a musician tuning his instrument. You sense that this is his sanctuary, a place where everything is where it's supposed to be. And for a moment you think maybe that's why the letter mattered so much. Not just because it came from Marcus, but because it restored order. The forgotten birthday had been like a crack in the walls of routine. The apology filled that crack not with grand gestures but with acknowledgement. Sometimes that's enough. Historians still argue whether the imperial staff felt real loyalty to their emperors, or simply performed obedience out of survival. But here with Tiro, the answer seems quieter. Loyalty doesn't always need spectacle. Sometimes it just needs consistency. A nod, a letter, a memory carried across a wax surface. Now you drift outside, pulled by the noise of a small commotion near the outer courtyard. A senator has arrived unannounced. This happens far too often, and is currently engaged in a tense discussion with one of the palace guards over whether his toga is formal enough for imperial presence. Spoiler, it's not. Tiro doesn't get involved. He knows better. But he does make a note of it, probably to inform the scribes later. Because the real power in the Roman palace isn't who yells the loudest, it's who writes the quietest. From here, your curiosity pulls you toward the role of letters in Roman life. And oh, what a rabbit hole that is. Letters in ancient Rome weren't just messages. They were performances. Entire careers were made or broken by the tone structure and timing of a single letter. Think of them as Twitter threads, but on wax and with life or death stakes. Wealthy Romans trained for years in rhetoric and composition, not because they wanted to win debates, but because they needed to know how to apologize, threaten, flatter, and maneuver, without ever being in the same room. An emperor's letter was the ultimate tool. It could declare war, settle lawsuits, pardon prisoners, or apologize to a forgotten servant. You find this idea strangely beautiful. That in a world of swords and standards and statues, something as small and intimate as a letter could carry so much weight. There's a fringe detail you stumble across buried in the notes of a 4th century grammarian. He describes an imperial scribe who once slipped in a personal line into an otherwise formal edict. Tell my son not to chase frogs near the aqueduct again. No one knows who wrote it, or why, but someone did. Someone thought that would matter. And maybe that's the thread that ties all of this together, care. The tiniest flickers of it in the margins in the fold of a letter, in the memory of a birthday. Not loud, not grand, just human. You're walking again with Tiro now in the upper wing of the palace, where the air is clearer and the tiles reflect the sky like a calm sea. He's headed to the emperor's study, not with a letter this time, but with a new list of appointments, a fresh scroll of senatorial requests, and a tray of warm water, scented faintly with bay leaves. Marcus is already there, seated cross-legged near a scroll rack, his eyes scanning a fragment of Stoic poetry. His hair is tousled, his tunic loose, and he looks every bit the philosopher king people write about, except of course when he sneezes mid-scroll, and then scowls like someone just insulted Plato. Tiro enters, quietly, places the tray down, bows. And just before he turns to leave, Marcus glances up. Their eyes meet. No words are spoken, but the silence between them is thick with knowing. You can almost hear Marcus thinking, "I remembered eventually," and Tiro, without needing to speak, replies, "That was enough." This moment, this soft, unrecorded exchange, won't make it into the annals of Roman history. But that's why you're here. To notice it. To hold it gently in your mind before it slips away. And maybe tonight when you lie down to sleep, you'll remember this too, that even emperors forget things. That even servants get remembered. And that sometimes the history that matters most isn't the part carved in stone, but the part written quietly in wax. You're back in the study. Marcus still hasn't spoken. Tiro is already halfway out the door, his tray empty, the letter still tucked safely away back in his quarters, like a secret no one else needs to know. The air between them lingers with that soft, strange warmth of mutual understanding, fragile like morning mist on marble, but real. But you don't follow Tiro this time. No, you stay behind. Because now it's Marcus. You want to observe the philosopher-emperor, the man whose face will be carved into statues long after the city crumbles, whose thoughts will be copied in ink centuries after his bones are dust. The man who just forgot a birthday. He stretches his shoulders slowly. That papyrus scroll he's reading droops in his lap, forgotten for the moment as he stares out the arched window across the rooftops of Rome. You can almost feel the weight pressing in from all sides, the empire, the wars, the politics, the plague that's been sweeping through the city in waves. And then beneath all that, the sudden stubborn memory of Tiro's birthday. He's human after all. He rubs the bridge of his nose with a thumb. Thinks. Maybe regrets. You wouldn't be surprised. The meditations, those famous private musings of his, are filled with tiny moments like this. He writes of his own flaws, his forgetfulness, his impatience. He scolds himself in ink like a tired parent scolds a child gently but firmly. You realize something else now. This wasn't the first letter of apology he's ever written, and it won't be the last, because Marcus doesn't wield the pen like a weapon. He uses it like a mirror. Every sentence he writes is a reflection of something deeper. So when he apologizes to Tiro, it's not just an act of correction, it's a kind of self-inventory. He's reminding himself of what kind of emperor he wants to be. Historians still argue whether Marcus Aurelius's meditations were ever meant to be read by others. Some think they were private notes never intended for public eyes. Others believe they were philosophical exercises, stoic journaling designed to train the mind. Either way, it's clear Marcus was a man who used words not to glorify but to understand. And letters, those were his daily practice. You float now through the study's scroll racks, brushing against fragile papyrus, their edges curled from age and Rome's humid summers. So many voices live here, petitions from governors, pleas from citizens, drafts of speeches, instructions to legions. But in a small box near the desk, tucked between a stack of tablets and a smooth river stone, someone once used as a paperweight, are the emperor's personal correspondences. And that's where you find it, a copy of the letter he sent to Tiro. It's short, honest, a little awkward, but beautifully simple. He writes, "I remembered late, and in this forgetting, I felt ashamed. In a world that often overlooks, I will try not to. Your presence is a kindness I've come to rely upon. I hope your day carried something gentle in it. M. No wax seal, no imperial crest, just a name and a sentiment." You sit with that for a while. Let the words settle in your chest. Because here's the thing, Marcus Aurelius could have had 100 people write that letter for him. But he didn't. He sat ink-stained fingers and all and scratched it out himself. Not for appearance, for connection. The same man who wrote stoic maxims about the brevity of life, about the insignificance of fame, about enduring hardship without complaint. He also took a moment to say, "I'm sorry, I forgot your birthday." Let that sink in. You wonder how many letters like this existed across the centuries. How many tiny apologies whispered on wax or scribbled in charcoal got lost to fire or mildew or disinterest. Because let's be honest, historians are often more excited about assassination plots than forgotten birthdays. But these small moments, they're the glue of the human experience. You move now with Marcus as he rises from his seat and walks out of the study. He doesn't go to the Senate chambers or the military wing. No, he goes out into the gardens. Not the grand formal ones, those are for show. He walks toward the medicinal herb beds, where he can be alone among the scent of lavender and thyme. You watch him pause near a cluster of mint plants, kneel and run his hand over the leaves. A bee hovers nearby, minding its own business. The sun's climbing now, casting soft rays across his brow. He closes his eyes. He's not meditating, not exactly. He's remembering. You can feel it, can't you? That mix of burden and clarity. The quiet pain of leadership that no triumphal arch will ever explain. Even emperors need moments of silence. And this Marcus is using his to think about a servant. One among hundreds. Because somewhere deep in his bones, he knows how you treat the lowest among you reveals the truest parts of who you are. It's here among the herbs and the sunlight that a strange little detail pops into your memory. Did you know some Roman physicians used gladiator blood as medicine? Yes, for epilepsy. It was thought to contain the warrior's strength. Wild right. Now compare that to Marcus, who finds healing not in bloodshed, but in accountability. That's the kind of emperor he wants to be. You pull away from the garden, higher now, above the rooftops of the palace. The day is in full swing. Market stalls open, hawkers shout about fish that probably aren't fresh. A child chases a ball, made from bundled rags, across a cobbled alley. Life goes on, but something small has shifted. You see it in Tiero's step a little lighter. You hear it in the way Marcus speaks to the next scribe, slower, gentler. You feel it in the palace itself, like the walls exhaled overnight. Because when someone powerful remembers someone ordinary, it echoes. And now you carry that echo with you. Through the columns, past the libraries, into the kitchens where a cook is threatening to quit over bad grain deliveries, into the baths where two philosophers are loudly debating whether cold plunges improve virtue they don't agree, into every small forgotten corner of Roman life. And that echo sounds like this. You were seen. The day wears on, and the palace hums with the thick, drowsy rhythm of Roman afternoon. Shadows stretch long across the mosaic floors, curling between the toes of marble statues. You glide past the colonnades, following Tiero, as he slips through corridors like ink over parchment. There's a scroll in his hand. Not the letter, no, that one's tucked safely in his satchel, perhaps even pressed between two sheets of olive wood for safekeeping, but another freshly inked and smelling faintly of myrrh oil. This one is for the imperial librarian, containing Marcus's requested reading, for the evening selections from Epictetus, something from Heraclitus, and a rather dry treatise on aqueduct tax reforms. You try not to yawn just reading the title. You wonder how many of these scrolls Tiero has carried over the years. Thousands, probably. Maybe more. And not just letters and lists and treatises. There are other kinds too, the ones no one talks about. Because Rome's written world isn't just emperors and senators. It's gossip, slander, love notes, threats, shopping lists. The daily graffiti of the empire scratched into wax or inked onto papyrus. It is quite literally a paper trail of humanity. And today, you're noticing all of it. As Tiero ducks into the library, you linger outside and drift along the hallway wall. There, etched faintly into the plaster behind a potted laurel, someone has scrawled a message, not in Latin, but Greek. You squint to read it. Dion slept here and dreamed of home. A servant's note, maybe. Or a guard's. Forgotten, unimportant, yet preserved like an ancient tweet no one deleted. It makes you smile. And that's when you start paying attention to all the other hidden things. The wax tablet, sitting in the corner with "Don't forget," bread scratched into it. The tiny tally marks on a lintel beam, where someone probably bored out of their toga, kept count of how many times the water-bearer tripped over the same uneven tile. The fragment of a love poem, unfinished, folded into the hem of a senator's discarded cloak. Historians still argue whether the Romans were as literate as we think they were. Some suggest widespread literacy was limited to elites, while others believe even common laborers could read enough to get by. The truth, likely somewhere in between. But here's what is certain: words were everywhere, and the people who carried them, people like Tiero, were the secret couriers of culture. They moved between worlds, from emperor to clerk, from poet to general, from the heart of power to the dusty streets where slaves bartered for leftover fish bones. And they did it without fanfare. Tiro emerges from the library lighter by one scroll and heavier by another. This new one is bound with a red thread, which means it's sensitive, likely personal. You lean in, can't help it. Curiosity is contagious. He doesn't open it, not yet. Instead, he walks past the atrium, where a fountain gurgles lazily beneath a sky just beginning to soften into gold. Past a cluster of senators whispering near a statue of Minerva, one of them clearly trying to pass gas. Discreetly, spoiler, he fails. Past a doorway where a slave girl is weaving garlands for an upcoming feast, humming a tune that probably hasn't been heard in 2,000 years. Tiro stops by the gardens, again. Not the formal ones, not the herb beds, but a narrow path lined with low fig trees where the air smells thick and sticky sweet, like overripe fruit. He sits, finally. The bench creaks, and now he opens the scroll. Not the red-threaded one, the other one, the letter, Marcus's apology. You can almost hear the rustle as the wax flexes slightly in the heat. The faint crackle of time pressed between folds. Tiro reads it again, even though he already knows every word. You watch his eyes follow the lines slowly, like someone tasting something too rich to rush. And something flickers across his face. Not joy exactly, not pride, but a deep, quiet recognition. Because this letter isn't just words, it's proof that he matters. That someone at the very top of Rome's glittering grinding machine noticed when the gears skipped a beat. And that changes something. You see it in the way he refolds the scroll carefully, like it might fall apart if handled too roughly. You see it in the way he tucks it close to his chest before slipping it away. You see it in the way he exhales, slow, steady, resolved. This isn't just a letter anymore. It's an artifact of dignity. And then you're pulled back quickly suddenly by the noise of a dropped amphora somewhere down the hall. A chorus of curses follows. The noise breaks the spell. Tiro's up on his feet again, moving with a bit more speed, a bit more sharpness to his step. You glide behind him into a room you haven't yet visited, the scriptorium. Ah yes, the nerve center of palace paperwork. The air in here is permanently stained with ink. Literally. There are smudges on every surface. Even the windows bear the faint outline of someone's frustrated elbow. Scrolls are piled in disorderly towers that lean like drunken senators. A boy is asleep at a desk wax stylus, still in hand, drooling gently onto a half-finished inventory list. This is where the real empire runs from behind smudged lenses and cramped hands. Tiro hands the red-threaded scroll to the senior scribe. Doesn't say a word. Just nods. That's enough. Everyone here speaks in eyebrow twitches and paper taps. It's practically its own language. You don't stay long. There's a different pull now back toward the emperor. Marcus is walking along the peristyle, flanked by two advisors who are speaking far too fast about something involving grain shipments and naval taxes. He's only half listening. His gaze drifts toward the horizon, past the rooftops, past the hills. Somewhere out there, he knows the plague still rages. Soldiers are dying, civilians too. And yet, his mind flickers back to the letter, a tiny decision, barely a heartbeat in the life of an emperor. But it has anchored him, reminded him that even the smallest cracks in the foundation must be tended to. Philosophers might call that wisdom. You might just call it being a decent human. As the sun lowers and Rome's golden hour begins, the city turns soft. Even the marble looks sleepy. The palace slows. Dinner preparations begin, roasted dormice, boiled lentils, the usual odd pairing of dishes that makes you wonder if the Romans ever truly understood seasoning. Tiro walks back to his quarters, tired but satisfied. The letter is still with him, and in a room just above his own, Marcus sits alone with his scrolls. He doesn't write tonight. Not yet. He simply watches the sky turn pink, then violet, then dark. And for a moment he smiles. You know that smile. You've worn it yourself maybe after sending a late birthday message and realizing it still mattered. Because sometimes the right words, no matter how belated, are enough to set things right. And Rome, for all its flaws, seems a little more balanced tonight. Evening in Rome descends like a thick velvet curtain, softening the edges of the marble city into something warmer, more forgiving. You can feel it in the way voices drop to a murmur in the orange glow of torches, flickering to life in the distant hum of water, lapping gently in the aqueducts. Inside the imperial palace, things settle into their nighttime rhythm. Feet shuffle more slowly down the halls. Cloaks are drawn tighter. Someone sneezes near the baths and immediately receives 3 side eyes and a whispered plague, because yes, the Antonine plague is still swirling through the empire, like a rumor no one wants to believe, but everyone is quietly terrified of. And yet, the world keeps turning. You find Marcus Aurelius in his private chamber, now lit by just a single oil lamp, its flame doing a slow, sleepy dance against the wall. He's alone. The day has peeled itself away from him, layer by layer, like a cumbersome cloak shrugged off at last. The weight of the Senate of legal petitions of another day without seeing his son, all of that is behind him now. In front of him is a fresh tablet and a stylus. Tonight Marcus writes, not another letter, not this time. This writing isn't meant for anyone else. There's no "to know dear," no name at the top. This is his evening ritual, what we now call the meditations, philosophical journaling, emotional surgery with a blunt instrument. You watch as he carves a line slowly into the wax. Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. Cheery stuff, right? But this wasn't pessimism. It was preparation. Stoic preloading. Like someone bracing their mind against a cold wind before stepping out into the Roman chaos again. And tonight, his mind lingers unsurprisingly on the letter to Tiro. You can see the theme forming in his writing humility memory duty. A reminder to himself not just to lead, but to remember the people who follow. He pauses, often staring into the flickering shadows, then returns to his carving. Historians still debate how much of the meditations were written in real time versus copied from older notes or teachings. Some suggest entire passages were lifted from Stoic manuals or rephrased from Epictetus's lectures. But honestly, does it matter? Because this emperor isn't trying to be original, he's trying to be better. As the lamp sputters gently, you look around his chamber. It's modest, almost monk-like for a man who technically owns everything from the foggy forests of Britannia to the sunburnt dunes of Egypt. One low bed, one shelf, a statue of Athena that's missing a hand. He likes it better that way. And on the windowsill, a small pile of pebbles. You float towards them. Each stone is smooth, worn down by water or wind. You can imagine him picking them up on walks through the garden or while traveling. Little totems of patience, of time. One of them has something etched into it, just a single word, in Greek, anamnesis, remembrance. Fitting, you drift back to Marcus just as he finishes his line. He puts the stylus down, doesn't reread what he wrote, doesn't need to. For him, the point isn't perfection, it's the practice. And then, something unusual happens. He smiles, not one of those polite public smiles he wears during Senate meetings or religious festivals. Not a grimace disguised as courtesy. This one's real, small, quick, but real. You know what he's thinking. He's imagining Tiro reading that letter again, maybe showing it to his sister, maybe folding it carefully into a box beneath his bed, maybe using it someday as a story to tell others once the emperor remembered me. That kind of story becomes legend, not because it's loud, but because it lasts. You leave Marcus to sleep. Down the hallway, the palace is quieter now. The kitchens have been cleaned, their fires smothered beneath layers of ash. Guards yawn at their posts. Somewhere a lyre plays a soft, repetitive lullaby. You drift past sleeping servants' mouths slightly open, heads nestled on folded cloaks. And then once more you find Tiro. He's writing too. You didn't expect this. He's not a philosopher, not a senator. But he has a wax tablet of his own, smaller, simpler, and he's scribbling in the pale light of a dying lamp. His penmanship is a little wonky, like someone trying to balance speed and neatness and landing somewhere in the middle. He's copying the letter. Not because he's afraid of losing it, because he wants to remember it better. Line by line, he rewrites the words in his own hand. Then he sets the original aside and rereads his copy. Lips moving silently, maybe mouthing Marcus's name, maybe wondering if the emperor meant every word. He doesn't know you're watching. No one does. But this moment, that flicker of personal importance, it matters. Because Rome was never just bricks and marble and columns. It was built on these moments. Small acts of recognition, of connection, of care. Not every Roman wanted to conquer Gaul or debate metaphysics. Some, like Tiro, just wanted to be seen. And tonight he was. You think again about how strange it is, this letter. A forgotten birthday. A flick of ink that could have been ignored, dismissed, left unwritten. But instead, it was crafted, sent, received. And now it lives. Not in the official records, not in marble, but in two people's minds, Tyro's and Marcus's, and now yours too. You pull back from the palace now, slowly letting the night air carry you higher. Above the rooftops, Rome is a shadow painting. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. The stars peek out like cautious observers. The Tiber hums softly in the distance, tugging the city gently towards sleep. You pass over the Subura, where laughter drifts from a tavern that definitely serves more vinegar than wine. You cross the Field of Mars, silent now, but still echoing with the sound of sandals slapping marble. And beyond that, the distant silhouette of the Colosseum resting like some great beast after a long day's roar. You pause, listen, feel. Rome is sleeping, dreaming, remembering, and somewhere tucked into the folds of that dream is a letter from an emperor to his servant. A small apology, a simple truth, a quiet promise you were not forgotten. You linger just above the rooftops now, the night having folded itself into the cracks of the city, like dust settling after a long march. Even the gods seem to sleep. Statues half lit in the moonlight look less like divine beings, and more like worn-out sentries standing guard over the quiet. But the mind doesn't rest, just because the world dims. No, your thoughts swirl gently, like silk ribbons in water, circling the strange power of that letter. The idea that something so small could ripple outward, brushing against the edges of politics, memory, even philosophy. And that ripple, it doesn't stop at Tiro, because you begin to wonder how many others were moved by the emperor's unexpected moment of softness. You follow the echo. Down the palace steps, across the stone courtyard, slick with dew, to a small lamplit annex where one of Marcus's secretaries, Lucilla, is reviewing scrolls. She's middle-aged, hawk-eyed, and mostly known for intimidating grown men into fixing their grammar. Right now, though, she isn't scowling. She's reading something carefully. And when she gets to the part of the emperor's note, the one that says, "I offer no excuse, only my regret," she exhales slowly. See, Lucilla knows what it means to be overlooked. She's transcribed half the emperor's correspondence without ever receiving a thank you. But tonight she's seen something rare. The emperor isn't above apologizing. Not even to a servant. And that lands heavy. In a good way. Like a cool cloth against a long-held burn. She sets the scroll down. Then she picks up her own stylus and starts writing just a few lines for herself. A quiet note, maybe. A whisper of inspiration. Or maybe a letter she's long meant to send to someone she hurt, but never found the words for. That's the thing about sincerity, it's contagious. You drift again, beyond the palace walls, into the quarters of the Praetorian Guard. A muscular man snores, like a dying ox, one leg flopped over a wine jug. But in the corner, one guard, Publius, is still awake, oiling his armor. He hums a tune off-key, slow and familiar, like something his mother used to sing. He's heard the story too. Rumors travel fast in Rome, especially when they're surprising. The emperor wrote a letter to a servant, an apology. It doesn't compute at first. Marcus Aurelius is supposed to be above petty emotion, stoic, composed, a walking statue with a beard. But Publius has seen him smile at children before, has seen him whisper to his horse, pat its flank like it's an old friend, has watched him hold his tongue when a senator insulted him in public, and later laugh about it over a bowl of figs. And now this letter, it rattles something loose in Publius. He looks down at his gauntlets and thinks of the last time he apologized to anyone. It's been a while. Tomorrow he decides he'll visit his sister's home. Bring some olives. Say what needs to be said. Maybe even write a few words first like the emperor did. You smile. The ripple grows. Meanwhile, in the servant quarters, Tiro isn't sleeping either. He's laying in bed, hands behind his head, staring at the wooden ceiling beams like they might spell out his future. The letter is tucked under his pillow. Again, you hear his thoughts not in words but in waves. Not pride, not exactly, but something deeper, like he's been reaffirmed, noticed. And in that moment, he's no longer just a servant. He's a keeper of meaning, of a message from the top of the world that somehow made its way to the bottom without losing its warmth. Historians still debate how often emperors directly addressed their household staff. The few surviving letters we have suggest it was rare. Even rarer still was tone. Most were commands, not compassion. So the idea that Marcus would apologize with no threat, no agenda, just humility, unprecedented. But you're beginning to see that's exactly why it mattered. Because Rome, vast and towering and brilliant, was also deeply impersonal. Lives vanished every day without comment. Buildings burned. Slaves were sold. Names disappeared like coins dropped in a fountain. And the bureaucracy, the massive, unblinking machine, kept turning. To be seen in Rome was to exist, and that letter made Tiro, and maybe others, exist a little more. You float again now into a classroom lit faintly by the glow of an early oil lamp. A young boy recites Virgil from memory, his tutor half asleep in the corner. He stumbles over a line, pauses, tries again. This boy, he's the son of a lower magistrate. His future is paper-thin. One bad year, one political slip, and he could be lost to obscurity. But today, his father came home early. He sat him down and told him about the emperor's letter. Said, even the most powerful man in the world can make a mistake and still be good. That line, and still be good, settled into the boy's chest like a pebble in a pond. Now as he struggles with poetry, it echoes in him. He tries again, stronger this time. You wonder what kind of man he'll become. The city continues to sleep, but quietly, gently its pulse has shifted. Not drastically, not dramatically, just slightly. The ripple has grown. Back in the palace, Marcus finally dozes off. You drift beside him as his breath slows and deepens, his brow unfurrows, and the tension of the day loosens its grip on his frame. But even in sleep, his mind is moving. You can feel it, not with worries or war councils, but with questions. Did Tiro understand? Did the words land the way they were meant to? Did he feel even briefly that his life mattered to someone who didn't have to care? That's the thing about writing, it's never truly done. You send it out like a ship on a vast ocean, and you hope it lands where it's meant to. Maybe you never know. But sometimes you feel it. Even if you're the Emperor of Rome, you glide through the cooling air one last time, tracing the outline of a city, forever trapped between magnificence and mortality. Beneath the forums and temples and sweat, a deeper truth stirs tonight. That memory doesn't come from monuments. It comes from moments. And the letter, small and tender, easily dismissed by some as trivial, has become exactly that. A moment, one that will linger not because it changed history, but because it quietly added to it. You drift again slowly now, as though the weight of the night has thickened, pressing gently on your thoughts. Rome below is wrapped in a hush so complete it feels sacred, like the world has been dipped in warm wax and sealed in time. But somewhere beyond the stillness, the letter is still moving. Not physically. Tiro's tucked it safely under his pillow again, but in minds, in whispers, in slow-burning reflections. This is where the echo truly begins. Because when morning arrives in Rome, it doesn't slam down like a hammer. It seeps in through cracks in the shutters, through the rustle of sandals, and the shouts of bakers kneading dough at sunrise. And with it comes chatter, murmured repetition. You land near a stall in the forum, where 3 scribes gather each morning to drink lukewarm barley water and gripe about ink prices. One of them, Aelius, who has a permanent ink blot on his cheek like a birthmark, leans in and says, "Did you hear the emperor wrote an apology to his servant?" The others laugh, at first. But then one of them asks, "Is it true the laughter falters?" And now the letter is doing something strange. It's becoming story. Not in the polished, dramatized way of Roman theatre, but in the way only real stories work, raw, told from person to person, reshaped slightly each time, but anchored by one central truth. The emperor cared enough to say, "I'm sorry." You move from group to group as the tale spreads. At a small laundry corner, a young woman tells the story to her friend while wringing out a tunic. She gets the details half wrong. Now Tiro is a baker's apprentice, and the emperor invited him to dinner. But the point remains: an apology from on high. That idea lands like soft thunder, unseen but felt. Historians still debate whether stories like this genuinely shifted behavior in Rome's social strata. Was there a measurable impact? Did more elites treat their staff with kindness in the years after Marcus's reign? Or was this just one good emperor in a sea of egos? We'll never know for sure, but the whispers, they mattered. In the way that seeds matter before you ever see a sprout. Later that day, a philosopher named Galenus, no relation to the physician, uses the story as an example in his lecture near the Temple of Concord. He's been teaching Stoicism for years, and now suddenly he has something fresh to reference. True humility, he says, is not thinking less of yourself, but remembering the dignity of others. He looks up. A dozen pairs of eyes blink slowly, registering the phrase. One student scratches it into his wax tablet. Another just stares off, thoughtful, and there it is again. The ripple, you follow it further. By midday, the Senate is meeting, and although it's not on the formal docket, the story of the emperor's letter is already present in the room, like a perfume someone forgot to name, but everyone smells. Senator Calvisius, always looking for a way to appear morally superior, brings it up casually during a debate about public grain distributions. "Should we not be more generous?" he says, stroking his beard in a way that makes you want to hand him a mirror. Our emperor, after all, has shown us that even small lives are worth remembering. A few senators nod solemnly. Others roll their eyes. One whispers, "He probably forgot your birthday too." But even behind the sarcasm, something has shifted. The tone, the temperature. Marcus Aurelius's apology has introduced a disarming new currency: emotional accountability. Not performative grief, not scripted speeches, but a private moment that leaked its way into public ethics. You drift past the Senate chamber and into the streets again, past a group of slaves carrying amphorae, their backs bent, their sandals flapping with every step. One of them, Cassian, mentions the letter, says it with a smile, like he doesn't fully believe it, but wants to. The others chuckle. "Sure, and next week he'll come do our laundry." But then one adds, "Still, it's nice to think about." You pause. That's enough sometimes. Just the thought, a world in which the highest man can see the lowest and care. That idea doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be possible. And what of Tiro? He's back to work now, polishing bronze lamps and rearranging scrolls. His fellow servants tease him. "You're famous now," one says with a grin, but he takes it in stride. There's something new in his posture today. Not arrogance, not even confidence, just presence. He isn't walking faster. He isn't doing more. But his work feels different now. More deliberate, more grounded, like each task holds a little more gravity than it did before. And you notice something else. He started keeping a small piece of wax in his satchel. A scrap. Nothing official. Just enough for a few lines of writing here and there. He jots down thoughts, half-formed, messy, private. You watch as he scratches. Don't wait for the world to notice you, but if it does, let it see all of you. Poetry, maybe. Or just the beginnings of a voice he didn't know he had. Elsewhere, a teacher at a primary school adapts the story into a fable for her young students. She turns Marcus into the wise lion and Tiro into the quiet mouse. And yes, by the end, the lion says, "Sorry," and the mouse forgives him, and everyone claps and has honey cakes. But the lesson sticks. One boy whispers later that night to his mother, "Even lions make mistakes." It's cute, it's soft, it's also deeply Roman. Because even in an empire obsessed with power, there was always room for philosophy, for the search, not just for order, but for meaning. And this little story, this tiny tale of remembrance and remorse, It weaves itself into that greater search. You follow it now, not just across Rome, but beyond into letters sent to family estates in Etruria, into songs hummed in marketplaces, into debates at bathhouses, where someone inevitably shouts, "Marcus should apologize for the taxes next," and earns a round of splashing laughter. The ripple keeps expanding, and yet it remains centered on one quiet thing: a man tired, burdened by an empire, writing a letter because he forgot something small and didn't want to forget it again. He remembered, and that made all the difference. Now, in a courtyard shaded by olive trees, an old woman named Sabina tells her granddaughter the story for the third time that week. The child leans in wide-eyed and says, "He said sorry," and Sabina nods. "That's what makes him great," she says, her voice a whisper against the dry leaves. Not just the wars, not the laws, but the fact that he remembered someone small. You settle beside them, letting the sun warm your back. The city breathe around you, the echo of that letter carry on. Not loud, but lasting. The sun now dips low behind the hills, casting Rome in that sleepy, honey-drenched light that makes every wall glow like it's been dipped in ancient gold. The streets exhale. The clamour of chariots and sandals softens to the rustle of robes, the whisper of fountains, the clink of amphorae being stacked for tomorrow's use. And still, yes, still the letter is in motion. Not in the ink and parchment sense. The scroll itself hasn't moved. But its echo, that's running laps around the city like a gossiping senator late to a scandal. You hover now near a theatre, not one of the big official ones, where patricians fan themselves and pretend they don't care, but a small side stage near the Trans-Tiberim, run by actors who smell vaguely of garlic and ambition. Tonight they're rehearsing a new skit. Guess what it's about? One actor, Caius, who usually plays drunken centurions, is now wearing a fake beard and a laurel crown. O noble Tiro, he declaims dramatically, "How dare I forget the celebration of thy birth, thou who doth refill my inkpot and never question my questionable poetry." Laughter erupts. Yes, it's satire. Yes, it's goofy. But beneath the giggles is something more affection, respect even. Because satire in Rome didn't always tear down. Sometimes it's celebrated by exaggerating. And tonight, in the makeshift glow of torchlight and oranges being juggled between acts, the emperor's humility has been elevated to comedy royalty. One audience member mutters, "Imagine if Nero had apologized for anything. Rome would still have a roof." A few heads nod. One snorts. The point is clear. This emperor different. And meanwhile, across town, in a tiny bookshop crammed between a wine vendor and a cheese seller, the story finds a new home. The shop owner, Fuscus, short and suspicious of everything, has decided to transcribe a cleaned-up version of the letter from memory. Why? Because people keep asking about it. And Fuscus has figured out that if he writes it down and slaps a dramatic title on it, The Emperor's Apology, a study in virtue, he can sell copies to curious readers and do a little moral good in the process. Capitalism meets ethics. Very Roman. He copies the letter carefully, stylus scratching like a beetle in sand. He even adds an introduction dripping in admiration that makes Marcus sound like a cross between Socrates and Jupiter. You shake your head gently amused. But hey, at least he's trying. The letter's impact now drips like wax into the cracks between layers of society philosophers, scribes, slaves, poets, merchants. It's reshaping Rome in ways no decree ever could. Not with force, but with feeling. And that in Rome was rare currency. You remember how Marcus studied with philosophers as a boy? Rusticus, Junius. Rusticus, one of the most influential in his life, had taught him that philosophy without action was empty, that virtue needed embodiment. Well, here it is, embodied, in a humble note, to a servant. And now, centuries later, historians still argue whether Marcus wrote other letters like this, quiet apologies that were never saved. Some scholars believe this one only survived because a junior scribe thought it was too unusual to destroy. Others think Tiro himself copied it, hoping to preserve what it meant. A few even whisper that it was a fabrication, an invention by later moralists to soften the emperor's image. But you've been there. You saw the ink, the pause in the candlelight, the weight in Marcus's brow as he chose those simple, hard words I forgot. And I regret it. It wasn't grand, it was real, and somehow that's more powerful. As the stars blink into place, you float above the Campus Martius, where ironically, military drills are finishing for the day. A centurion barks orders until his voice gives out. Dust clouds rise like exhausted ghosts. Young men pant sweat shining on their shoulders. Even here the story surfaces. One recruit says, "Imagine if our general apologized every time he forgot we were people." A few chuckle. Another mutters, "Might make me believe in stoicism." Funny how fast the tale travels, but also not funny at all. Because you see now that the letter's true power isn't in its uniqueness, it's in how relatable it is. Forgetting someone's birthday, that's universal, human. A quiet kind of heartbreak we all carry either from being forgotten or from doing the forgetting. And an apology, rare but unforgettable. You settle beside Marcus again that evening. He's reviewing military reports, eyes tired but mind alert. Next to him sits a fresh scroll unfinished. He stares at it for a while, then writes, "If we desire the good, we must look first to the small." He stops, ponders, adds, "Not in speeches, not in grand gestures, but in the turning of the face toward another." He doesn't sign it, doesn't know yet what it will become, but it feels like something he needs to say. You drift further, now, to a small countryside villa, 2 days' ride from Rome, where a retired official reads the tale aloud to his wife under a grapevine arbor. She listens quietly, then says, "I wish you'd written like that when we were younger." He winces, then smiles. Too late. She shrugs. Never too late to remember someone. And there it is again. The ripple. This is what memory is made of, isn't it? Not statues, not Senate records, but the way one person pauses, chooses humility, and shows someone else you matter. Back in the city, in a cramped room, lit only by a single oil lamp, a former slave named Unia copies the story for her children. She's illiterate, but her eldest son is not. He reads it aloud as she tells it from memory. He doesn't skip a word. When he finishes, she whispers, "That's the world I want for you." You pause there, just long enough to feel her breath slow as her head leans back. The letter has made it here too. Somehow, quietly, and still you drift. Watching, listening, following this thread of gentle revolution. Marcus Aurelius, from the peak of imperial power, wrote something soft, and the softness has become strength in the world's corners. You wonder how long it will last. Will Tiro keep the letter forever? Will his children tell the story? Will this moment survive when the marble crumbles and the maps change, and Rome is reduced to ruins with wildflowers growing in the cracks? You think maybe, because words when they come from the heart outlast everything. Even empire. The night in Rome thickens, turning silkier now, like the city's breathing has finally slowed to a soft, even rhythm. Torches flicker gently. Shadows stretch long and thin, blurring the edges of columns and courtyards. The marketplace lies quiet, baskets, empty tables, stacked laughter, replaced by the low murmur of distant water from a public fountain. And still you keep drifting. Like a wind that doesn't rest, you float over rooftops and courtyards, following the letter's echo, still warm in the minds of those who heard it, even second-hand, even mistaken, even stylized. Because this isn't just about an emperor saying sorry anymore. It's about what happens when someone at the very top, someone with no need to apologize, does so anyway. That has a gravity of its own. Now you're watching a small classroom tucked between two shrines, one to Minerva, the other to Fortuna. A young schoolteacher, Lucilla, is doing something strange. She's asked her students, 10 wiggly boys with stained tunics and dusty sandals, to write apology letters. Not to each other, not even to her, but to people they've forgotten. Write to someone you should have remembered, she says gently, and tell them why you didn't. Some of the boys grumble. One pretends to poke his eye with his stylus, but others pause. You hover above one as he scrawls. "To my sister, I'm sorry I took your doll and didn't tell you. I was jealous it had both arms." It's not the eloquence of Cicero, but it's honest. And in honesty, the echo grows. Meanwhile, Marcus himself is quiet tonight. Tired, yes. But deeper than that, drained in that stoic way where emotion isn't absent, just studied carefully like a philosophical puzzle. He's staring at the sky again, thinking, perhaps about the idea that remorse when genuine feels like an itch under the ribs. You can't ignore it. And when you finally speak it aloud gently, it quiets something old inside you. He's felt that quiet now. And you feel it too. So let's go smaller. Let's follow the letter not to a senator or a soldier or a scribe, but to someone entirely outside of Rome's center. Someone the empire barely notices. A man named Otho, who lives in the foothills east of the city. He's a beekeeper mostly for local honey sales, and he's heard the story secondhand from a merchant who'd passed through a week earlier. The details were garbled. The emperor forgot a feast, or maybe a funeral, or maybe a gladiator match, but what stuck was this. Marcus Aurelius apologized. That's all Otho needed, because the next morning he writes his own letter. Not on parchment, not in ink, just a small slate board and a bit of chalk. It says, "To Brutus the Hound, I forgot to feed that winter. I was grieving, yes, but you were hungry. I'm sorry." You watch him place the slate under a stone beside the grave of a dog long gone but still held in memory. That's the power of a ripple. It doesn't always reach the grand halls. Sometimes it finds a man and his ghost. And it gives him a word he hadn't used in decades, sorry. Back in the city, Marcus dictates a new reflection to his personal notes. Not for publication, just for clarity. Let no title place a man above his humanity. We rule not by power but by presence. I would rather be known for one kind gesture than 10,000 silent laws. He stops, exhales, and leaves it at that. No signature, no revision. You know he'll probably rewrite it tomorrow. He always does. But for now, those words hum with the same energy that first inked the letter to Tiro. And as the city sleeps, scholars elsewhere in the empire start to notice something odd, an uptick in philosophical essays about remorse. One in Alexandria, another in Athens, a third in Gaul. They don't cite the emperor, they don't mention Tiro, but their timing is suspicious. Historians still debate whether these essays were direct responses to the letter, or just part of a broader philosophical mood shift during Marcus's reign. Some claim the Stoic schools were moving in that direction anyway, toward inwardness, vulnerability, a gentler masculinity. But others insist it began with the emperor himself, with that moment. That candlelight, that soft-spoken, "I'm sorry." You follow another copy of the letter now, this one penned by a student who heard about it through a cousin of a guard at the palace gate. The copy isn't perfect. It swaps some words, adds a few lines that Marcus never wrote. You are not forgotten. And if you ever feel small again, remember that even emperors make mistakes. A lovely line, not true perhaps, but meaningful. And that's the funny thing, isn't it? Truth and story often dance around each other like mischievous twins. The letter may evolve, bend, inflate with retellings, but at its core remains one thing: remembrance. That's what people cling to. You pass an elderly midwife who's kept a small copy of the story under her mattress for weeks. She reads it before sleeping. She says it helps her forget the patients she couldn't save. It reminds me, she whispers once, that even the best forget. And remembering again, that's the grace part. Even now, her words press gently into the night like warm bread under a cloth. You feel it settling. And the city, this sprawling, fire-scarred, marble-veined body of ambition, feels softer too. Like someone has pressed a balm into its skin. Not enough to heal all of it, no. But just enough to soothe the sore spot for a while. That's what a letter can do. A simple one. No gold leaf. No dramatic seal. Just ink, humility, and the courage to say something soft in a loud world. You pass a temple quiet, except for a single priest sweeping ash from the brazier. He hums a little tune. At first it's hard to catch, but then you hear the words old and worn. The gods forgive the humble first. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But Rome tonight has started to understand that forgiveness isn't just a divine act. It's deeply human too. You wake-well drift to a city that has tilted subtly. It's not the architecture or the politics. The aqueducts still flow, the senators still scheme, and the temples still smell faintly of incense and baked dust. But something underneath has changed. The letter has done what no decree ever could. It's made Rome stop and reflect. Just a little. Just enough to soften a few brows and slow a few egos. You hover now in the tablinum of a domus belonging to a mid-ranking official named Septimus. He's the kind of man who keeps a mirror beside his scrolls just to catch his own reflection when reaching for a quill. You'd expect him to laugh at the letter, mock it, use it as a punchline at dinner, but tonight he's staring at a rough draft of a message. Not for the emperor or a senator or even a client. It's for his mother. She's old lives in a small villa miles south, and he hasn't written her since his promotion. Not because he's cruel, just busy, ambitious, a Roman. But the letter stuck in his mind, especially that line, "Your day mattered, and I should have marked it." And now Septimus begins, "Forgive the long silence. I thought success would be enough to speak for me. It wasn't." You can almost hear his pen scratching like a conscience. And maybe that's the point. Not to inspire poetry, just to nudge someone into remembering what they've ignored. Outside, the city stirs slowly. Merchants roll carts into place, patting sleepy donkeys. The Forum remains its usual theatre of urgent nothingness, but here and there pockets of quiet bloom where people are doing something rare. Reaching out, one scribe leaves a note for his apprentice. Simple stuff. "You've done well." Sorry I don't say it often, but the apprentice finds it before dawn and rereads it 10 times before breakfast. In the palace, Marcus stretches before sunrise, his joints stiff, eyes grainy. He's aged more this year than the last 5 combined. But as he watches the first light slice through the colonnade, you feel it. He knows. He knows the letter moved things. Not just the man it was meant for, but everyone who heard about it. Everyone who copied it, exaggerated it, turned it into comedy, tragedy, prayer, proverb. And despite all that, it remains what it was, a personal apology. But now something else too. A myth in motion. And you know how Rome loves its myths. This one doesn't come with bloodshed, divine omens, or scandal. Just a flickering candle, a pause, and a name remembered too late. Still, historians argue even now whether Marcus intended it to be public. Some claim the letter was intercepted and published without permission. Others insist he knew it would spread, and that its intimacy was a carefully constructed moral performance. But you saw the quiver in his hand. You saw the hesitation, the scratched out phrases, the deep breath before sealing it. It was real. And that's what matters, even as its echo grows stranger. In a taverna across from the theatre of Marcellus, a group of amateur philosophers are debating whether the apology undermines imperial authority. One slams a cup on the table. An emperor must lead, not grovel. Another shrugs. Maybe leading means knowing when to kneel. A third, already tipsy, mutters, "I just wish my landlord apologized like that." You move past them amused. Because of course, Rome must analyze everything. Dissect even kindness like it's a military maneuver. But outside that tavern, a small plaque has been hung. Just 4 words painted in soft ochre. Even emperors say sorry. You pass a group of children who pause to read it. One whispers to another, "Maybe I should say sorry to Marcus for kicking him." Which Marcus? The one with the weird hair. They run off laughing, sandals flapping, but the seed is planted. Even in children, that's how deep it goes. And then you float further into the domus of Tiro himself. Yes, him. The man whose birthday started all this. He's folding linen quietly. His hands are careful, methodical. You can see the faint ink stain on his left thumb. He's been copying something too in his spare hours. He pauses, then steps to a small wooden box and lifts the lid. Inside is the letter. The original. Unfolded and read so many times the creases look like scars. He doesn't cry. That's not his way. But he sits, and he breathes in a slow, steady rhythm, like the words still calm him. You notice something odd. He's added a slip of parchment underneath the letter. His own reply. "You remembered. That was more than I expected, and far more than many receive. Be well, and do not be too hard on yourself." It's unsigned, private, but powerful in its own way, because Tiro understood what most of the empire forgot. Forgiveness is its own kind of empire, hard to win, impossible to hold. but glorious while it lasts. And now across the empire, the ripple becomes a current. In Hispania, a former general leaves a note at his son's grave. "I should have told you I loved you before I sent you to war." In Syria, a merchant records in his ledger, closed early today, "Wrote a letter to my sister, first one in 12 years." In the northern border, town soldiers begin keeping journals. Short ones, just a line or two per day. But most begin with the same phrase, "to remember." Not because the emperor told them to, but because he showed them how. You drift upward now, high above the Palatine Hill, the Tiber snaking in the distance like a lazy silver ribbon. Rome below you is sprawling, loud, brilliant, flawed. An empire in its full contradictory glory. But tonight it feels a little more human, a little more soft. And you think maybe this is what legacy really means. Not just laws or conquests or marble arches, but a small act that makes a large place feel close, personal. And maybe if enough people remember that, then Rome might just outlive its own legend. The wind drifts colder now, and the lamps glow gentler across the Roman rooftops, as if the city itself is learning to hush. But you aren't quite ready to sleep yet. There's still something in the air, soft, persistent, like a song you haven't finished hearing. The emperor's apology lingers not like a thunderclap, but like mist. It's everywhere and nowhere. You can't grasp it, but you feel it in your chest, in that deep, slow heartbeat that comes when night has pressed its palm over everything loud. You're following another version of the letter, now this one. Strange. It's carved into a wax tablet, but it's been heavily altered. Gone are the simple human lines Marcus wrote. In their place is something more theatrical, flowery, embellished to the point of absurdity. "Dearest soul, whose festal hour I did tragically forsake, my spirit groans with Olympian sorrow." Oh boy. You hover over the scribe who wrote this. His name is Plautus, and he works part-time as a poet, full-time as a flatterer. He's rewriting the emperor's words to make them sound more imperial, less humble, more poetic. He's planning to send it to a noblewoman as a birthday gift. She never receives it. Instead, her servant finds the wax tablet, laughs out loud, and copies it badly onto a wall near the Circus Maximus. It becomes a bit of graffiti alongside others like Claudius was here, and a very unfortunate caricature of a goat-legged senator. Still, the point remains, even as it mutates, the letter spreads. It becomes a shapeshifter. Historians still argue whether the graffiti versions of the letter disrespected the original intent, or helped it reach the everyday Roman. It's the old academic divide, purity versus accessibility. But if you ask the street kids playing near that wall, they'll say, "That's the one where the emperor said sorry, right?" And that's the power of myth. It gets trimmed, mangled, made into parody, and still it survives. Now drift east toward the Jewish quarter, nestled beyond the Aventine's shadow. In a quiet home, a rabbi reads a translation of the letter passed to him by a Roman trader. He nods slowly. He's seen pride. He's seen cruelty. But this was new. I wonder, he murmurs to a young student, if King David ever apologized to his harp player for forgetting his name. The student giggles, then asks a question that makes the rabbi pause. Would it matter if he did? The rabbi only smiles. Of course it would. Words carry weight long after voices fall silent. And just like that, another echo is born. The city is a nest of those echoes now. In the streets, whispers. In the homes, copies. On the lips of teachers, merchants, and lovers, reminders that even the great can forget. And that when they remember, it matters. You cross the Tiber now, and on the other side, something curious is happening. A troupe of actors is rehearsing a comedic version of the letter. No, really. In their tiny theatre space, a courtyard borrowed from a bored noblewoman, they've reimagined the story. The emperor becomes a bumbling fool who forgets every birthday name and even where he left his sandals. Tiro becomes the wise, overworked servant who saves the empire by reminding him to say thank you. The play is hilarious, but underneath the slapstick and silly masks is a tenderness, a truth. The final line, "Say sorry even if you rule the world," You feel the audience sigh when they hear it. A long, quiet exhale, like someone letting go of a grudge they didn't realize they were holding. Sometimes the truth has to wear a funny hat to be heard. Now let's check in on a few more of the letter's quiet ripples. There's a young woman named Cecilia who sells garum yes fermented fish sauce. She smells like tragedy, but she's clever and kind. She heard the letter while delivering bottles to a senator's home. She didn't believe it at first. An emperor apologizing for a servant's birthday, but it stuck with her. And that night, she pulled out an old scroll and wrote to her father. He'd left when she was 10. She'd vowed never to forgive him. But now something has shifted. The scroll says, "You forgot me. I won't forget that. But I'm still here. And if you ever wish to say something, say it." She seals it and doesn't know if she'll send it. But the writing alone changes her posture. She walks taller, lighter, like an old burden just slipped off her shoulders. And isn't that what apologies are supposed to do? Not erase the hurt, just loosen its grip. You drift back toward the imperial quarters where Marcus sits with his daughter Lucilla. She's listening intently as he reads a letter, not his own, but one to him. An old friend, now a governor in Crete, has written to say, "Your letter reminded me of the boy I once was. The boy who cried when his tutor forgot his name on his name day. I still remember that ache. So I sent him a letter too after 30 years. Thank you for the reminder." Marcus smiles faintly. He does not boast, he never will. But you can see the glimmer of peace behind his tired eyes. Sometimes he says to Lucilla, being emperor means making laws. Other times it means making amends. She nods, then adds, with all the grace of a teenage girl, "You should write more letters like that." He laughs, one scandalous act of humility at a time, and they sit together a while longer, the candlelight framing them like a painting. Later, when Marcus returns to his study, he glances at the empty parchment in front of him. The ink is ready, the quill waits. He doesn't write just yet. He simply thinks. You can hear his thoughts soft and private. Who else have I forgotten? That's the real echo. Not the words, not the calligraphy, but the question. And now you carry it with you too, like a pebble in your pocket, small weighty ever present. Who have you forgotten? And what would it sound like to remember? The moon rides high now, casting a silver glaze across the rooftops of Rome, making the marble glow like bone, and the shadows pool like spilled ink. You drift along its quiet paths, weightless, almost transparent, and with every gentle swirl of wind, the world below seems to sigh in its sleep. And even though its night Rome continues, torches still flicker in alleyways. A baker kneads dough in pre-dawn silence. A pair of guards lean lazily against a crumbling arch, debating whether figs count as a proper breakfast. And in the thick of it, buried deep in the heart of a disorganized villa on the Calian hill, an archivist named Paternius wrestles with a problem that's neither military nor political, but infinitely trickier: how to catalogue an emperor's feelings. See, word has reached him about the letter. Not just the original one, he hasn't seen that, but the 100 versions that have trickled in from across the empire. Rewritten, recopied, repurposed, sometimes riddled with ink smudges and poetic license. Some say Marcus Aurelius apologized for forgetting his servant's birthday. Others claim it was for a missed name day, a forgotten wedding, a spilled cup. One version even suggests he forgot the servant's dog's birthday, which, let's be honest, is hilarious. Paternius snorts softly just thinking about it, but the point remains the letter exists now in more versions than Venus has statues, and he has no clue where to file them. Private correspondence, moral treatise, urban myth. He rubs his temples, sighs, and adds a fresh scroll to a pile labelled "Simply Ambiguous Human Moments." That's as accurate a label as you'll get. You hover over his shoulder as he scribbles something at the top of the scroll. The words may not be true, but the truth is in the words. Poetic for a man who once catalogued tax receipts. Elsewhere in the city, not far from the Arch of Titus, a philosophy student named Gaius paces the garden of his instructor's home. He's got the letter memorized, one of the clean versions, simple and direct, and he's trying to work it into a stoic framework. Is it an act of logos, he mutters, or a betrayal of emotional discipline? The instructor, older and wisely half asleep in the doorway, waves him off. Sometimes a man says sorry because he should. That's it. But the emperor... Even emperors stub their toes, Gaius. It's a terrible metaphor, but Gaius pauses. Because that's the essence of it, isn't it? We think the powerful don't stumble, that they glide across polished floors on carpets of certainty. But even they bruise. And if they're decent, if they're awake, they notice. And when they do and they say something, well, that matters. You float now past a statue of Romulus gleaming ghost-like in the moonlight. You half expect him to sneer at all this softness. After all, Romulus didn't say sorry he murdered his own brother to found the city. But you suspect even he, in some secret chamber of myth, might appreciate this gentler version of Rome. Rome 2.0, the apology patch. You cross into a small atrium, where two elderly women sit weaving. Their fingers are swift, their patterns intricate. They aren't talking about Marcus, they aren't quoting the letter. But as one threads the needle, she sighs. I forgot Julia's birthday again. The other woman nods. Then tell her, next time you see her. You think it still matters? Of course it does. If the emperor can say it, and they fall silent again, their needles clicking like distant rain. It's everywhere, this subtle shift. In the taberna where a teenager writes sorry on a scrap of parchment to slide under the door of a girl he shouted at. In the temple where a priest quietly adds an extra votive for someone he wronged 2 festivals ago. Even in the bathhouse where 2 naked old men awkwardly acknowledge a fight they had 3 decades earlier over who got the warmer bench. I shouldn't have thrown your sandals. I shouldn't have kicked them into the pool. Both nod. Nothing more. But the silence that follows is healing. And still the letter drifts outward on the backs of traders and travellers. By now it's reached Alexandria, where philosophers are already debating the syntax. In Gaul, it's being performed in taverns with exaggerated Latin and thick regional accents. In Britannia, a military scribe has copied it onto a clay tablet and pinned it beside the barracks latrine. And in a dark corner of the empire, a wind-beaten village on the edge of the Danube, a boy named Lucan is reading it aloud to his sisters by firelight. He doesn't understand all the words, but he likes the way they sound. Especially the part where the emperor says, "Your day mattered." It makes him think of his mother who died the previous winter. She used to say that every day was someone's birthday, and that you should always bake too much bread just in case. And though Lucan only has potatoes, he shares them evenly, pretending it's a feast. You hover, you watch, and you realize this story isn't about an emperor anymore. It's about everyone else. It's about how people take something small and sincere and build something out of it. A moment becomes a memory becomes a mirror, and a mirror, if you're brave enough to look into it, can change you. There's an open scholarly debate over whether Marcus Aurelius ever wrote that letter at all. Some say it's entirely apocryphal, a folk tale sewn into the emperor's image after his death to humanize his otherwise solemn legacy. Others point to handwriting fragments and diary entries, and the peculiar fact that too many versions exist for it to be total fiction. But whether it's fact or fable, one thing is clear. It was believed, and belief, as Rome has always known, is stronger than marble. You find yourself drifting back now toward the Forum. It's quiet at this hour, eerily so. The statues look less proud and more reflective. You pass a bust of Augustus and imagine him muttering, "I'd never say sorry, but maybe I should have." Then past a half-broken statue of a forgotten general whose face has been worn down to a featureless lump. And you wonder, did he apologize to anyone before the end, or did he vanish in triumph and silence? That's the cruel truth of power. It builds monuments faster than it builds memories. Unless, of course, someone writes a letter, and someone else reads it, and passes it on, and suddenly, a servant's forgotten birthday becomes something eternal, not because it was grand, but because it was real. The hush deepens as you move through what's left of Rome's waking hours. Shadows stretch longer. The air stills. Even the wind seems to tiptoe, now reluctant to disturb the city's fragile sleep. You glide silently over shuttered villas, the tiled roofs glinting like dragon scales in moonlight, and you sense that the story, this curious tale of an emperor's apology, is nearing its final echo. But before the quiet closes completely, there's one more place to visit. A schoolhouse. Not grand. Just a modest room near the Subura, with low benches and walls smudged with charcoal doodles of gladiators' dogs, and for some reason chickens wearing togas. Inside, a teacher named Melissus is finishing a lesson by lamplight. His students, mostly children of merchants and former slaves, are curled on the benches, some already nodding off. But one small boy named Fabius sits bolt upright, his hand in the air. "Sir," he whispers, trying not to wake the others. What did the emperor mean when he said, "Your name deserved to be spoken"? Melissus, to his credit, doesn't brush him off. He sets down his stylus, rubs his tired eyes, and thinks. Well, he says slowly, sometimes people in power forget the people who help them. They think names don't matter, but they do. Even little names, especially little names. Fabius smiles, and you can see the flicker of something blooming in his mind. A seed planted unlikely to bear fruit for years, but it's there. That's how legacy works, not in statues, in sparks. And so this odd little letter, scribbled or sincere, real or reshaped, continues to ripple outward across generations, cities, and even continents. Later centuries from now, a monk in a cold stone monastery will find a torn parchment barely legible with a Latin line that reads, "Forgive me, I forgot, but you were not forgettable." He'll tuck it into a collection of maxims, not knowing its origin, just sensing its weight. Historians still debate whether that's a copy of the imperial letter, or just a coincidental echo. But again, we find ourselves at that beautiful, blurry intersection of fact and faith. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Marcus Aurelius is aging. His beard is longer, his letters more sparse. But his journals, his famous meditations, are thick with reflection. On loss, on kindness, on discipline, on pain. Tucked between the pages, if you look closely, is a fragment that feels very familiar. It says, "A day forgotten is not always a day lost, so long as the soul seeks to return. Return humbly, return fully, return late if it must be, but return." You pause when you read that. Is it referencing the birthday letter? Is it a poetic afterthought? Or is it simply what we want it to be? Historians surprise argue about that too. But you feel it. That same cadence, that same longing. And in the end, longing is more honest than memory. Somewhere else in the city, a young woman writes her own version of the letter. She isn't an emperor. She's a candlemaker's apprentice. But she forgot her sister's birthday. And instead of ignoring it, she picks up a scrap of parchment and writes, "I was wrong. You deserve more than silence." She doesn't know if her sister will ever read it. But the act alone makes her breathe differently, like she cleared space inside her chest. That's what an apology does. Not magic, not perfection, just space. You drift once more across the Tiber, your weight as light as dream dust now. Rome lies below you like a city exhaling. Even the statues seem softer, their stern eyes closed, their mouths curved in something nearly like peace. You glance back toward the palace, where Marcus sits alone in his study. The candle beside him flickers its light, wavering like a heartbeat. He's not writing now, just sitting. Remembering perhaps the servant whose name he forgot. Remembering what it felt like to put ink to shame. And maybe feeling something close to grace. Outside, the stars have shifted slightly. You notice it in that half-dream way, the way you notice your own breath slowing, or the way a room tilts gently as you doze. The story is settling now, the last pages fluttering closed. But before that final drift, one last story for you to carry. A century after Marcus dies in a different empire, entirely, a child is born into a world that does not value apologies. He grows into a leader powerful and clever, but prone to pride. One day, he stumbles upon a translated scroll, broken Latin, choppy grammar. And yet, he reads the words, "I forgot your birthday, you mattered. I am sorry." And something cracks in him, not enough to change the world, but enough to write a letter of his own. That letter survives, and someday someone will read it and write another. That's how it works. Not thunder, not trumpets, just ink, just honesty, passed like a whisper, soft and slow and stronger than stone. You float now just above the Palatine Hill, where Rome itself once began a ragged cradle of myth, mud huts, and ambition. Below all is still. The temples have stopped murmuring. The lamps have gone out one by one. Even the Tiber flows more quietly, like it knows the city's story is finally ready to sleep. And yours, dear dreamer, is curling close too. But before the last thread is tied, one final thing happens. In a quiet courtyard tucked behind a broken aqueduct, a man named Publius sits on a stone bench, a scroll resting on his knees. He's a former soldier now, a gardener. Hands cracked, knees stiff. Soul a little quieter than it used to be. He's reading that same old letter. The one with the apology. It came to him through a merchant from Carthage, who got it from a centurion, who got it from a widow who kept it under a jar of honey. It's wrinkled, blotched, and translated badly into rustic Latin, but it still says, "Your life deserved acknowledgement. I failed, I see it now." Publius breathes out slow and deep, and he smiles. He smiles because he remembers a boy from long ago, a stable hand, maybe 14, who once handed him a sword he dropped during inspection. Publius barked at him, embarrassed, and walked away. Never said thank you. Never remembered his name. Now, decades later, sitting in moonlight and lavender, he whispers, "I'm sorry, it's not loud. There's no audience." But the night air catches the words and they hang there for a moment before slipping into the stars. You hover above him and feel the city exhale again. Because this is the strange magic of regret. It doesn't undo what was done. It can't. But it can soften the ground for something new to grow. And Rome, ancient, glorious, exhausted Rome, understands this better than most. This is the city that burned and rebuilt. The city that conquered, collapsed and consoled. The city where a single missed birthday might spark 1,000 small awakenings. Down the road, a child tucks a note under her pillow. It's her version of the letter, written in crooked script, addressed to the friend she forgot to invite to her Saturnalia party. Next door, a widow leaves 2 figs by her husband's grave, a silent offering for the words she never got to say. And in a humble bakery, a man quietly kneads extra loaves, just in case someone comes in tomorrow with sadness on their face. These things are not traced to emperors, but they are born of the same impulse to see, to name, to remember, to say, "I noticed you weren't noticed." And that's the heart of it, isn't it? History, for all its marble and thunder, is really just a long, lumpy trail of people trying to be seen. Sometimes through war, sometimes through art, and sometimes through a simple, slightly awkward, beautifully human apology. Historians argue whether this letter changed anything. Some say it was absorbed into Aurelius's legacy, like everything else a footnote in a fog of meditations. Others say it launched a new tradition among Roman officials to mark the birthdays of staff and slaves, inscribed discreetly into the bureaucratic scrolls like whispers in official ink. But maybe it doesn't matter, because the letter didn't change the empire. It changed the people, and those people changed each other. Quietly, repeatedly, and so it continues. Even now, long after marble fades and torches dim, the echoes remain. Not in monuments, but in minds. Not in conquest, but in kindness. You drift higher now above the rooftops and hills, watching as the city curls into itself. The Colosseum is dark. The markets are still. The ghosts are curling back into the corners. You smile, because you know the secret. You know that somewhere, someone's going to remember this story tomorrow. And they'll remember not the emperor, not the date, but the feeling. The strange, sleep-softened warmth of someone important saying, "I forgot you, but you mattered anyway." And that's a lullaby history rarely sings. But tonight it did. And now, as your breath softens and the edges of thought begin to blur, let the weight of this strange, gentle journey fade into the background. There's no need to hold on to names or dates. No need to solve the puzzle. Just let it dissolve. Like mist over the hills or parchment, curling softly in the warmth of a forgotten sunbeam. Let Rome fall away its statues, its senators, its sleeping emperors, and feel yourself float far above the ruins. There's nothing here but peace now. No battles, no voices. Just that soft, steady rhythm of sleep approaching like footsteps in deep sand. Breathe in, and let go of the scrolls, the shadows, the long corridors of debate. You don't need to remember whether the letter was real. You only need to remember how it made you feel. A little seen, a little soothed, a little softer. With every exhale, let the night settle deeper into your body. Your shoulders are looser now. Your chest is light. Even your thoughts are beginning to trail off like candle smoke in a quiet room. There's nothing else to do, nowhere else to be. Just here, wrapped in story, drifting towards silence, carried gently on the breeze of time. You've heard enough for one night, and the rest can wait. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.